He's one of the most recognizable figures in human history, and yet open the earliest biblical texts and you won't find him. The ruler of hell, the fallen angel, the eternal enemy of God. That figure isn't there. So, where did he come from? If you too appear nowhere in the earliest books of the Bible, check out Pantheon, our brand inspired by myths, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. Close your eyes and picture the devil. What do you see? Maybe horns, maybe wings, a figure of darkness and fire, ancient and malevolent, the eternal enemy of everything good, the being who tempted Eve in the garden, who tested Job, who fell from heaven in a blaze of pride and built a kingdom in the void below. Satan. And in 1866, the French artist Gustave Doré gave him a face that has never quite left us. Illustrating John Milton's Paradise Lost, the great English epic of the fall, Doré drew Satan magnificent in ruin, beautiful, defiant, standing on the shores of hell, having chosen this rather than submit. Those illustrations spread across the world, shaping how painters, filmmakers, theologians and ordinary people imagined him for generations. But Doré was illustrating Milton, and Milton was writing in 1667. And the Satan Milton wrote about had already been taken shape for well over 1,000 years before Milton ever put him on the page. The further back you go looking for him, the harder he is to find. Go back far enough, and he disappears entirely. In the earliest books of the Hebrew Bible, the word Satan appears quietly, almost incidentally, as a job description. The Hebrew term Ha-Satan appears only 17 times in the entire Hebrew Bible. 14 of those occur in the book of Job. The remaining 3 appear in the book of Zechariah. Elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, the word Satan or Satan is used for human adversaries, enemies, opponents and obstacles. The figure exists in precisely 2 texts, and in both of them he is doing a job. The theology of the earliest Hebrew texts imagines God presiding over a court. The Bene Elohim, the sons of God, a gathering of celestial beings who assist in the governance of creation. They meet, they report, they are assigned tasks. Ha-Satan is one of them, a colleague with an unpleasant role. In Job chapter 1, the sons of God come to present themselves before God. Ha-Satan arrives among them. God asks where he's been. Roving across the earth, he says, walking back and forth across it. God turns the conversation to Job. Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. Ha-Satan's response is a lawyer's response. Does Job fear God for nothing? You have put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has. You have blessed the work of his hands, but stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. It is a prosecutorial argument, a challenge to the evidence, a question about whether Job's righteousness is genuine or merely the product of God's protection. God considers it a fair question. He gives permission. Ha-Satan goes to work. This is the being that would eventually become the devil, sitting in the divine court, raising a procedural challenge, waiting for authorization before he acts. In Zechariah, the scene is even more explicitly a courtroom. Joshua, the high priest, stands before the angel of the Lord dressed in filthy clothes, a symbol of the spiritual contamination he carries on behalf of his people. Ha-Satan stands at his right hand, the position of the accuser in a Hebrew legal proceeding, ready to bring charges. The Lord rebukes the accuser. Joshua's filthy clothes are removed, clean garments are placed on him. The case is dismissed. A prosecuting attorney whose case fails, a legal official whose challenge is overruled. The being in these texts is a legal official, a prosecutor, a subordinate who acts only with permission, a being entirely within the structure of God's authority. By the time we reach Doré's paintings, church theology, horror films, sermons, and the imagination of 2,000 years of Western civilization, that being has become almost unrecognizable. They barely share a name. Something happened between them. The serpent in Genesis has no name. It is described as crafty, more crafty than any other creature God made. It speaks, it reasons, tempts, and, when the conversation with Eve is over, the fruit has been eaten and God arrives to deliver the consequences, the serpent is cursed to crawl on its belly and eat dust for the rest of its days. That is all Genesis says. A talking serpent, a temptation, a curse. For centuries, the serpent was simply the serpent. The reason is straightforward and remarkable. When Genesis was written, the concept of a personal devil hadn't yet taken shape. There was no figure in the theological landscape of ancient Israel with whom the serpent could have been identified. The Ha-Satan of Job and Zechariah, the accuser in the divine court, bears no resemblance to a talking serpent in a garden. The connection would have made no sense. The identification begins to emerge during the Second Temple period. The Wisdom of Solomon, written sometime in the 1st century BC, contains the line, "Through the devil's envy death entered the world." It does not identify the serpent explicitly, but the implication is there. Something malevolent lay behind what happened in the garden, something to do with intention. The first person to make the connection explicitly was Justin Martyr, a 2nd century Christian apologist. In his dialogue with Trypho, written around AD 155, he argued directly that the serpent in the garden was Satan or Satan. It was a new argument. It needed making because it wasn't obvious from the text. Other church fathers followed, including Theophilus and Tertullian, building the identification into Christian theology piece by piece. By the end of the 1st century AD, the book of Revelation had made the identification explicit. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, we read, "The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world." Ancient serpent. The text reaches back across centuries to the garden. It takes the unnamed creature, gives it a name, and in doing so transforms the story about a talking snake into the opening move of a cosmic conflict that stretches from Genesis to the end of time. The serpent had been waiting in Genesis for centuries. Revelation gave it a name, or rather, the name it would carry for the next 2,000 years. Before anyone imagined a personal devil, there was something older and stranger, something more fundamental, the chaos that existed before creation, the darkness before the first word was spoken, the formless void that order had to be imposed upon. The ancient Near East imagined this chaos as a creature. In Babylon, around the 12th century BC, the Enuma Elish, the great creation epic, told the story of how the world came to be. At the beginning there was Tiamat, the primordial salt water, a goddess vast and ancient who existed before the younger gods, the living sea from which creation would eventually emerge. When the younger gods grew noisy and disturbed her rest, she raised an army of monsters to destroy them. The storm god Marduk chose to face her. They fought. Marduk killed her, and from her body he made the world. He split her in two, made the heavens from one half and the earth from the other. Creation as the defeat of chaos, order imposed on disorder through violence. The world built from the body of the thing that had to be overcome. In Egypt the same pattern appeared again. Every night as the sun god Ra descended through the underworld, he was attacked by Apep, a serpent of darkness so vast it could swallow the sun. Every night, Ra and the gods who travelled with him fought to hold it back. Every morning, the sun rose. But Apep returned the following night, and the night after and after. The struggle never ended. These figures belong to a world older than the devil, older than fallen angels, older than a personal enemy of God. They represent the raw force of disorder pressing against creation. They established an idea that would echo through the countless traditions, that existence required a cosmic opponent, that the world was one rather than simply made, that beneath the order of things, something older still moved. The Hebrew Bible carries traces of this older world. In Genesis chapter 1, the Spirit of God moves over the face of the deep, tehom in Hebrew, the primordial waters of chaos. Many scholars have noted the striking relationship between tehom and the Babylonian name Tiamat. Whether one developed directly from the other remains debated, but the resemblance is difficult to ignore. The chaos was already present at the beginning. The adversary would come later. In 586 BC, the Babylonian Empire destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and took the Jewish elite into exile. They would remain in Babylon for nearly 50 years. Then something changed. In 539 BC, a Persian king named Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. He freed the Jewish exiles. He allowed them to return to their homeland. He authorized the rebuilding of the temple, and in the Hebrew Bible, the most sacred text of Jewish people, Cyrus was given a title that had never been given to any non-Israelite before or since: God's anointed, Messiah, a Persian king called the Messiah by the God of Israel. The religion associated with the Persian Empire was Zoroastrianism, and Zoroastrianism had something Judaism never fully developed before the exile: a personal cosmic adversary. Angra Mainyu, later Ahriman, the destructive spirit, the opposing spirit, the great enemy of Ahura Mazda, the supreme God of light, truth and wisdom. This was one of the earliest fully developed visions of an adversary in religious history. Tiamat was chaos made creature. The Ha-Satan of Job was a legal official within God's court. Angra Mainyu was something different, an independent force of destruction, a being with his own will, his own intentions and his own purpose, one who stood in deliberate opposition to the good. Zoroastrianism built an entire framework around this conflict, good and evil locked in a struggle that began before the world and would end only with its final renewal. Human beings caught in the middle, required to choose. Angels serving the good, evil spirits serving the bad. A final resurrection, a last judgment, a renewed creation after evil had been defeated. Many of the ideas that later became familiar in Jewish and Christian belief already existed within this Persian framework. The Jewish people lived under Persian rule for roughly 2 centuries. They rebuilt their temple under Persian authority. They produced some of their most influential literature while living within the Persian world. The great Zoroastrian scholar Mary Boyce argued that the similarities between Zoroastrian and post-exilic Jewish thought are too substantial to dismiss as coincidence. Other scholars disagree. They argue that these developments grew primarily from within Israelite religion itself, with Persian ideas acting as a catalyst rather than a source. The evidence is found in the chronology. Before the Babylonian exile, the Hebrew Bible presents a world with almost no developed concept of Satan, no named hierarchy of angels, no detailed picture of the afterlife, and no fully developed cosmic struggle between good and evil. After the exile, these ideas emerge with increasing clarity throughout Jewish literature. What can be said with confidence is this: by the Second Temple period, Jewish thought had begun describing a personal adversary who looks remarkably different from the Ha-Satan of Job. Whether that transformation came through Persian influence, internal development, or a combination of both remains one of the great debates in the history of religion. The similarities are striking. His name was Angra Mainyu, and the people who would eventually give the world Satan spent 2 centuries living in his shadow. The Babylonian exile had transformed Judaism. The Persian period had introduced new ways of understanding the struggle between good and evil. Then came the centuries most people never hear about. The period between the Old and New Testaments is often treated as silence. The Hebrew Bible ends, the New Testament begins. 4 centuries appear to pass with nothing in between. In reality, those centuries changed almost everything. Jewish writers began asking new questions. Where did evil come from? Why did angels rebel? Why was humanity so easily corrupted? If God is good, why had the world become so broken? Some of the answers appeared in books that never became part of most modern Bibles. The most influential was the Book of Enoch. According to Enoch, the corruption of the world began in heaven. A group of angels, known as the Watchers, descended to the earth. Their leader was Shem-Yazar. They took human wives. They abandoned responsibilities they had been given. In doing so, they crossed the boundary between heaven and earth. The children became the Nephilim, giants whose violence spread across the world. The corruption did not end there. Another watcher, Azazel, taught us knowledge that had never been meant for us. He revealed the making of weapons and armor, the working of precious metals, cosmetics, enchantments, forbidden arts. Civilization advanced. So did violence. For the first time, evil had teachers. The Book of Enoch transformed the landscape. Angels became corrupters. Heaven became dividers. The origin of evil reached into the heavenly realm. Other Jewish writings continued expanding this world. In the Book of Jubilees, Mastemah appears as the leader of hostile spirits. He asks God to leave a portion of the demons under his authority so they can continue testing and corrupting humanity. Around the same period, Judaism increasingly speaks of Samael. His role differs across different texts. Sometimes he is an accuser, sometimes an angel of death, sometimes the force behind temptation. His identity was still developing, but one thing had become clear. The spiritual world was becoming larger. Angels had names. Demons had hierarchies. The heavenly court of Job had become a battlefield populated by rebellious angels, hostile spirits, and supernatural powers operating against the purposes of God. By the end of the Second Temple period, the Ha-Satan of Job had begun to acquire new attributes, new associations, new darkness. The official who once stood among the sons of God was becoming something else. The devil we recognize was beginning to emerge. There is one name missing from everything we've covered so far. The name most people expect to find at the beginning of this story. Lucifer. He arrives with us here, near the end. In the 8th century BC, the prophet Isaiah composed a taunt against the king of Babylon, a political poem, a piece of mockery directed at a human ruler who had grown too proud, too powerful, too convinced of his own divinity. The text describes his fall with an image of devastating beauty. How you have fallen from heaven, Hillel ben Shakar, shining one, son of the dawn. Hillel, the shining one, a poetic description of the morning star, the planet Venus as it appears just before sunrise, brilliant and brief, outshone as soon as the sun rises. Isaiah uses it as a metaphor for a king who burned bright and fell fast. Nothing more. In 382 AD, a scholar named Jerome was commissioned by the Pope to produce a definitive Latin translation of the Bible, the Vulgate. When he reached Isaiah 14:12, he translated Hillel as Lucifer, light bringer, the Latin name for the morning star. It was a translation choice, a linguistic decision that would later take on a life of its own. By the time Jerome made that choice, the Church Fathers had already been reading the Isaiah passage as something more than political satire. Origen, in the 3rd century, had been connected to Isaiah's fallen morning star with Jesus' words in the Gospel of Luke. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. 2 separate texts, one image. The Church Fathers read them together and the identification began to harden. Lucifer, the light bringer, the morning star who fell, a poetic image transformed into the story of Satan before his fall. Another piece of the assembly clicked into place. In Revelation chapter 22, verse 16, Jesus describes himself as the bright morning star, the same image, the same celestial body. The image was never unique to Satan. Lucifer became the devil's name because centuries of interpretation gradually gave it that meaning. The name was never inherited. Like so much of the devil himself, it was assembled. And then the New Testament opens. Suddenly everything looks familiar. The figure who emerges in the pages of the Gospels has travelled a long way from the legal official of Job's divine court. He is personal. He's powerful. He has a will, an agenda, an active opposition to everything God is doing in the world. He appears in the wilderness, 40 days, 3 temptations. He offers Jesus the kingdoms of the world, all of them, everything. And in the account of Matthew and Luke, Jesus doesn't dispute the claim. The authors of the Gospels believe the kingdoms of the earth belong to him. He is behind the illness Jesus heals. When Jesus exorcises demons, he is dismantling something. A kingdom, a hierarchy, an organized opposition. The Pharisees accuse Jesus of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebub, the prince of demons. Jesus responds by arguing that a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. He is describing Satan's kingdom as a kingdom. In the Gospel of John, he is the ruler of this world. In Paul's letters, he is the god of this world, the prince of power of the air. He blinds the minds of unbelievers. He disguises himself as an angel of light. He prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And then Revelation, the great dragon, the ancient serpent, the one called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, thrown down from heaven, commanding an army of angels, making war on the saints, binding nations, empowering rulers. In a single verse, Revelation pulls together every thread we've followed. The chaos dragon of Babylon, the ancient serpent of Genesis, the accuser of Job's divine court, the ruler with cosmic authority over the kingdoms of the world. The assembly was complete. He was Satan, and he had never existed quite in this form before. We need the devil. That's why we made him. He became an explanation, a way of giving evil a face, a name, a voice. Something outside ourselves that could tempt us, deceive us, whisper to us, and bear responsibility for the worst parts of human nature. Why do people commit acts of extraordinary cruelty? Why does suffering exist? Why does evil seem to return no matter how many times we defeat it? We need the devil. Because without him, we're left with ourselves.